I am Isabella Hayes, 36, and a lawyer. My world fell deathly silent as I held the will in my hands, a document that would change everything. My eyes scanned the narrow official lines, but my heart was in a whirlwind. What should have been a moment of acknowledgement and joy for a lifetime of achievements felt like a punch to the gut. I felt choked by the betrayal unfolding before me. The family lawyer, a man of gentle tones and kind gestures, read the words as if to soften the blow, but they echoed in my mind like a drumbeat. My father's entire legacy, the fortune he'd built with such tireless effort, was being left to Raphael, my distant cousin, my grandfather's favorite. Each letter was a stab, and the fragility of my position grew before me. I bequeath him all my possessions, with the expectation that he will uphold our family name. The final clause of the will stated. Every word was a betrayal, not only to me, but to the memory of the man who raised me and who always told me that justice would prevail. Rage burned in my throat, but this wasn't the time to succumb to despair. A cold calculation settled in my heart. What they didn't know was that I was not only determined to reclaim what was rightfully mine, but that the manipulation, betrayal, and contempt I'd faced would backfire on them spectacularly. They forgot that blood also cries out for justice, I thought, resolve hardening, the need to act taking hold. If my family thought I would be silenced, they were dealing with something far deeper and stronger. I replayed the memories surrounding my father, his lessons, his stories, the pause in his voice when he spoke of justice and integrity. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was an heiress seeking her history. The moments we shared became fuel for the justice I craved. On that somber afternoon, I transformed, not just into a grieving daughter, but into a warrior determined to resurrect the truth buried under Raphael's whims and the machinations of Aunt Clara, who had always lived as a shadow of my family's legacy. I took a deep breath, re-examining the will, which in my hands had become a weapon. I needed to calm down, to approach the process with a lawyer's logic. My strategic mind, sharp as a sword, began to formulate a plan, step by step. How could I contest the validity of this will? What evidence would I need to gather? I guided myself through the questions that needed answering. The betrayal was a fact, but my reaction needed to be methodical. As I thought it all through, the coldness began to envelop me like a comfortable protective coat. There was a new purpose in my life, and it was clearer than ever. The pursuit of truth. Not just for the inheritance that belonged to me, but for the honor of my father, which could not be erased by a treacherous will. They may have forgotten the cry of blood, but I wouldn't. The justice I sought wasn't merely a financial matter. It was a matter of honor, of value, and above all, of legacy. And I was just getting started. Memories of my father danced in my mind like leaves in the wind. Each laugh, each sermon, each tight hug resonated like a distant echo in my heart. He was more than a parent. He was my mentor, my guide, an anchor in a sea of uncertainty. I remember the afternoons spent in his study, surrounded by mountains of law books. He taught me about laws and justice, but also about the importance of character and honor. Justice isn't just about winning or losing, Isabella, he used to say in that warm voice that always calmed me. It's a legacy we leave for future generations. That phrase became a mantra in my mind, especially now that I needed it more than ever. However, there was another side to this story. Raphael. I had always known him well, and the rivalry between us was palpable. Although we were cousins, there was a thin line between us that made our relationship strange. Raphael was grandfather's favorite grandson, always surrounded by attention and affection. On the other hand, I felt like an outsider, a forgotten shadow compared to his brilliance. From childhood talent competitions to backyard bike races, there was a constant feeling that I needed to prove myself, that I was more than just a supporting character in the family story. With the revelation of the will, those memories began to resonate in a darker, more intense tone. I remember a family dinner, where conversation flowed and laughter echoed through the room. Tales of achievements were interspersed with knowing glances between Raphael and the adults surrounding him. On those nights, while grandfather shared his stories, I could feel Raphael observing me, not with affection, but with a calculated disdain. One night in particular would remain etched in my memory. He challenged me to a word game, and I, in the innocence of adolescence, had tried to fight back. Grandfather clapped, laughing at the situation, and Raphael just smiled, that smile that hid the certainty that, in no way, would I ever be up to his level. The resentment resurfaced with each new memory, especially when I looked at Aunt Clara. The way she looked at me mixed jealousy and contempt, and it was palpable. Every now and then, she felt compelled to comment on my unsuitability to our world, insinuating that I didn't have what it took to inherit the family legacy. For a long time, her words became my insecurities. It hurt, but it also strengthened me. Over time, I realized their animosity only revealed their own fear of losing prestige. Time passed, and I became a respected lawyer, familiar with the intricate and often devious tactics of estate law. However, a part of me clung to a childlike desire to exceed expectations and prove my worth to those who doubted me. That yearning to be seen and heard by my father and family was interwoven with my quest for justice. Now, looking at the will, that drive became my fuel. Immersed in my profession, the experiences gained during years of legal battles formed the basis for a strategic action plan. Family interactions transformed into potential evidence. Every word, every exchanged glance was a clue leading me closer to the truth. The family dynamic might not have been simple, but it had nuances that revealed what lay behind the curtain. I decided to trace every interaction and every word that had passed between me, Raphael, and Aunt Clara. As both lawyer and witness, I was forced to examine not only the surface of relationships, but the depth of the betrayal. The truth was, I had the skills to exploit each of their weaknesses. The dynamic that once seemed disadvantageous now became a battlefield where I could claim the truth. The battlefield was set, and while emotions simmered within me, reason began to dominate the scene. The path was tortuous, but each step I took brought me closer to what was always rightfully mine. They overestimated my ability to be silenced. I had chosen the fight. The memories of my father weren't just a source of pain. They reminded me that I had what it took to win. The injustices would eventually be unmasked, and as the truth began to shine, I saw myself becoming not only a lawyer, but the daughter my father always wanted me to be, his honorable ally. In every thought, in every plan I formulated, I felt his strength resonating within me, a voice reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. I was the guardian of his memory and his legacy, and that, in itself, gave me even more motivation to face this battle and ensure that, in the end, justice would prevail over any betrayal. The pressure began to mount, but determination pulsed in my chest like a drum. I knew I couldn't allow myself to hesitate. The truth was within my reach, and I was willing to fight for it. The will, a document that had previously caused me pain, now became the starting point for my odyssey. With a sharpened mind, I resolved to decipher it and search for every detail that could help me discern why my grandfather had made such a choice. I grabbed my pen and a notepad, transforming my office desk into a battlefield. Each word of the will was analyzed for flaws, ambiguities, or inconsistencies. It was a meticulous task, but the hours became moments of pure concentration. Why would Grandpa leave everything to Raphael and exclude me? I wondered. Each collision of ideas became a new question to be answered, and I began to assemble the pieces of the puzzle. In the following days, I sought the help of John, the private investigator I had previously contacted. He was someone I trusted to unearth truths hidden in the shadows. I went to him hoping his expertise could offer the perspective I lacked. We met at a small cafe, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the tension in the air. John listened attentively as I shared the nuances of my family, the rivalries, and the betrayals that felt palpable. "The first thing we need to do," he said, his gaze as sharp as his mind, "is to find out what really happened behind this will. We can try to locate property records and check for any suspicious activity." I agreed, enthusiastic about the idea. Thus, we began working on our plan, gathering information that could transform into evidence. In the following days, our meetings were filled with an investigative frenzy. With each new discovery, the puzzle began to make sense. Indicators of suddenly missing financial transactions, records of irregularly made purchases in Raphael's name, and even suspicious conversations and emails began to come together like a complex web revealing the betrayal of Raphael and Paul. One email in particular, titled "Our Future," spoke of expected financial maneuvers and the accumulation of properties. The content made it clear that Paul and Raphael were plotting something bigger, a carefully designed scheme to divert the family fortune to themselves alone. Each revealing word was a drop of eloquence that, in the end, stripped bare the cruel game they were playing against me. As the revelations piled up, the pressure increased. The tension turned into heat, and I felt it in the family gatherings, where Raphael's calculating glances seemed to be a constant. He always assessed me with a watchful expression, as if aware that something was in the air. This feeling of being watched made me question whether it was time to act, or if I still needed more evidence. But I couldn't let fear take over. This game of power, intrigue, and family machinations demanded courage. Immersing myself in the investigation transformed into a new way to honor my father. He always told me that the truth, more than winning in court, was about seeking justice for those who had been deceived. And now, that truth was unfolding before me. The tear of pain I initially felt was now the leaven of resolve and determination. John and I maintained our routine, revisiting new records and documents. Each turn in the research seemed closer to dismantling Raphael's plan. I was no longer a supporting character in the narrative. I was becoming the protagonist of my own story, determined to fight for what was rightfully mine. However, time was running out. With each family gathering, my heart grew heavier. I knew I needed to act before Raphael and Aunt Clara could solidify their positions of power and continue to destabilize what remained of our family name's credibility. The fight was just beginning, but adrenaline pulsed through my veins, guiding me toward the path of truth and justice. I knew I was about to enter an intellectual battle that, when successful, would not only reclaim my legacy, but also restore my family honor. Days flew by, and family reunions became a veritable pressure cooker of emotional turmoil. Tension hung in the air like a heavy cloud, weighing me down. Raphael and Aunt Clara presented themselves as always, smiles on their faces, but there was a glint in Raphael's eyes, a gleam suggesting he knew I was pursuing what was rightfully mine. It was up to me to delve deeper into my investigations, to piece together the puzzle and uncover how this entire scheme had unfolded. John and I decided to intensify our research, searching for answers that would not only help us, but also substantiate the inevitable accusations. Our conversations became more frequent, and each new email exchange we analyzed revealed a new piece of the labyrinth. One day, while examining some messages exchanged between Raphael and Paul, I came across a correspondence that made me stop abruptly. In it, Raphael mentioned a meeting with a real estate broker and an incredible opportunity that could change his life. I knew that with close inspection I could find irregularities. With each new detail we uncovered, the picture of Raphael's treacherous plan began to solidify. I needed to act quickly to ensure that the party of illusion didn't become the only reality. The moment the evidence started accumulating is when I decided to contact the broker mentioned in the email. It was a long shot, but I was willing to do anything to learn more about what was happening. With a mix of nervousness and determination, I dialed the number I had found. A calm, professional voice answered on the other end of the line. I presumed the real estate broker, Leonardo, was someone who knew the ins and outs of the market like no other. When I inquired about recent property sales, I realized my intuition was right. He seemed hesitant to talk about Raphael, but I quickly asserted that I was interested in some related transactions. Of course, I needed to be subtle. As our conversation progressed, the tension in Leonardo's voice became more evident. He mentioned a client who was in a hurry to acquire properties in a way that wasn't common. The use of vague terms made me uneasy, but I sensed there might be more beneath the surface. As a successful lawyer, I knew his reticence could be a sign that Raphael was involved in something shady, a scheme that could be about to unravel in disaster. "I'm just helping. I'm not involved in anything illegal," he said, and something in his voice made me think there might be more to the story. As soon as I hung up, I revealed the information I had gathered to John. He had a look of excitement mixed with concern. "We need to expose the truth quickly. If Raphael is manipulating the real estate market, we can use that against him. A property scheme might be the thread that unravels the web of lies." What started as a series of investigations surrounding the will had now transformed into a labyrinth filled with empty promises and shady intentions. John paid a visit to the broker's office while I worked to map out all the legal safeguards Raphael might be using or concealing. I felt the weight of expectations growing as I honed my arsenal for battle. The investigations continued for weeks, and with each passing day, the pressure intensified. However, when an email arrived with an attached file, my heart leaped. It was an exchange of messages between Raphael and Paul, discussing not only the will, but also how they intended to use Grandpa's support to secure their future ambitions. The scene was becoming increasingly dark, and the combination of financial manipulation with attempts to destabilize the will was a scandal in every word. I was no longer just seeking a solution. I was building a solid case, a narrative that would bring to light the dark secrets Raphael was trying to bury. The phone rang, and I answered. It was John, his voice brimming with excitement and a touch of anxiety. "Isabella, we need to meet. What we've uncovered could be the key to dismantling their plans. We need to finalize this before they realize our move." About an hour later, I met John at a cafe. He held a folder full of documents. These property records show that Raphael was carrying out transactions on behalf of third parties, trying to hide the true nature of what was happening. He transferred properties and financial resources at an alarming level. I flipped through the documents, feeling my heart pound as I realized the extent of the manipulation. The revelations gave me a new focus. The crude and treacherous plan Raphael had hatched not only revealed his ambition, but also his weakness. I knew my time was running out. With each revelation, the web of lies began to unravel, and the idea of exposing Raphael became more than just a strategy. It was a call for the justice my family deserved. With the weight of truth manifesting in my hands, I began to visualize the next steps. It was time to formulate a definitive plan, gather the evidence, and prepare my case in a way that left no room for Raphael and Aunt Clara to escape. "All eyes are on us, Isabella," John said, his voice firm. "We must act before they catch us off guard." And so, with each piece of the puzzle slowly falling into place, I prepared to enter the battlefield, my resolve doubled to confront the traitors who had infiltrated our home. The fight for justice was about to reach its climax, and I was ready to wield it like a weapon. The days following our meeting at the coffee shop passed in a whirlwind of fervent emotions and strategies. The preliminary hearing was fast approaching, and every moment counted. Adrenaline still coursed through my system, but a new wave of clarity and purpose washed over me. My mind was exploding with ideas on how to build a case that would not only expose Raphael's betrayal, but also make it clear that I wouldn't hesitate to fight for what was rightfully mine. With the file of documents John had brought, the evidence began to come together like pieces of an intricate jigsaw puzzle. That sunny morning, I sat down with the dossier containing crucial details about every real estate transaction Raphael had made, every forged signature, and every offshore bank account. With John's steady gaze, I felt stronger, more determined. At stake was the integrity not only of my father's legacy, but of a legacy that was about to be erased. "We need a clear line of attack," I said to John as I examined the documents. "The best way to present this in court is through a clear narrative that shows not only the financial fraud, but the malicious intent behind it. It's not just about the will, it's about what Raphael tried to do to our family." He nodded, his face lighting up with excitement. "You're right. We can connect the real estate fraud to the will and create an irrefutable thread. We should focus on his motivations, on how he manipulated not only you, but also Grandpa." The following weeks became a frenzy of research, phone calls, and meetings with Carlos, the forensic accountant. With the skill of a detective, Carlos began to map the network of properties in question, showing how Raphael had attempted to conceal his transactions. He meticulously explained how using shell corporations and third parties to hide his actions was a common technique among fraudsters. With each session, the extent of the corruption that had taken root in our family dynamic became clearer. With every new piece of evidence we gathered, my nervousness transformed into confidence. The narrative solidified, and I knew I was on the right track. All my experience and training as a lawyer culminated at this single point: bringing the truth to light. This wasn't just about an inheritance. It was about exposing a betrayal that I couldn't allow to flourish. After weeks of intense work, the day of the preliminary hearing arrived. The atmosphere was thick with nervous energy. The courtroom was packed, and amidst the crowd, I saw my biggest concern: Raphael. He sat beside me at the defendant's table with a carefully masked, confident expression, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. There was something in his gaze that told me he was as alarmed as I was determined. The scene was almost theatrical, predator and prey in a game of power. Upon receiving the judge's word to begin, I lifted my head and took a deep breath. "Your Honor," I began, projecting my voice with assurance. "Today, I present not just a case, but a long-suppressed truth, manipulated and buried. What happened to my father, our assets, and our legacy is not just a personal offense, it's an affront to the dignity of our family's memory." The rising voice, and 130 souls present in the room, turned itself into the intelligence of the fight for truth. I focused my presentation on every detail I had collected. I presented the documents that showed the real estate transactions in the names of third parties, drawing a clear line from the evidence that would culminate in the farce orchestrated by Raphael. Speaking about my cousin's abuse of trust and his involvement with Paul became a moment of not only emotional revelation, but also of hope. The emotion grew with every line I exposed to the court. I looked at Raphael, who was now moving in intense nervousness. The look of shame that began to show on his face was a sign of what was to come. Raphael is not just an heir. He is a manipulator and a deceiver who uses family trust to exploit vulnerabilities, I declared, holding up one of the emails I had analyzed. He didn't just content himself with accepting a legacy. He took aggressive measures to eliminate it. What happened here is a conspiracy against my father's memory, and I wouldn't allow it to continue. With the door open for discussion, I introduced Paul's role as a betrayer who not only supported a false narrative, but reaped advantages at the expense of a deeper truth. The reaction of the family members, who had previously looked at me with doubt, now began to change. I saw some heads nodding in support, and this gave me the strength to continue. With a growing clamor, I made a powerful appeal to the dignity of the truth. After 2 long hours, as I concluded my presentation, I addressed the judge directly. "I ask your honor to consider not only the evidence presented here, but the importance of restoring my family's honor. What was lost must be reclaimed." The silence in the courtroom was palpable. The judge, with a serious expression, began asking questions, not only to me, but to my opposing counsel. He saw the strength of what I had presented, and at the same time understood that the truth could not be silenced. After his deliberation, he made a pivotal announcement. The hearing would proceed, and the trial would encompass the evaluation of the details I had introduced. I left the courtroom with my heart a mixture of relief and hope. I had weathered the storm, and now the truth was beginning to triumph. In that moment, I knew the fight wasn't over, but a new chapter was about to unfold. Justice was approaching, and with it, the chance to rewrite our family history. I was determined to keep fighting, now more than ever, and knew I was one step closer to finally having what was rightfully mine and rescuing my father's legacy. The days following the preliminary hearing were a mixture of anxiety and anticipation. I felt like I was walking a tightrope, balancing the definition of my personal life and the legacy my father had left behind. The connections between the pieces of evidence became clearer as John and I exhausted every detail to prepare for the next phase of the fight. The truth was now on a clear path, and we knew we were only beginning to dismantle the web of lies Raphael had created. When I arrived at the courthouse on the day of the trial, I felt a knot in my stomach. The atmosphere was thick with uncertainty. There were murmurs among those present, and the unreadable expressions of Raphael and Aunt Clara reminded me of what was at stake. I needed to hold firm. I couldn't let their insecurities affect me. The room was fuller than last time, the air dense with the anticipation of a truth many in the room weren't prepared to face. When the judge entered, the murmuring ceased, and the weight of the situation settled. He looked at me, and it made me feel like we were in a monumental dance. The judge didn't just want my case. He wanted a story that resonated with truth rather than betrayals and manipulations. I added confidence to my step and met his steady gaze. I was ready. The first part of the trial involved the reading of the records we had collected. John, acting as my supporting counsel, conducted the testimonies methodically. We presented each piece of evidence clearly, the transactions, the fraud, and how Raphael had manipulated the situation to his advantage with a well-crafted strategy. Every word I uttered became a sharp argument, cutting through Raphael's defense, which was trying to hold firm. During the presentation of evidence, a growing escalation in Raphael's worried glances was evident. Nervousness manifested in his gestures, and I could see that his mask of confidence was slowly disintegrating. Based on the property documents we presented, each item demonstrated not only financial losses, but a profound betrayal of my father's memory. I felt like I was peeling back layers of a building built on a foundation of sand, and the truths were increasingly exposed. The afternoon in that courtroom became a dance between discovery and despair. We recounted not only the fraud, but also the impact it had on me, as a daughter, and on our family as a whole. The tears I hadn't wanted to shed came from the depths of my soul, welling up with each word I uttered about my principles and values, the lessons my father had taught me. Among the testimonies, one stood out. Carlos, the forensic accountant, was called to testify about the manipulation system he had uncovered. He laid bare the use of shell corporations and strategies that Raphael and Paul had employed to conceal their actions. The clarity with which Carlos spoke made the room register the weight of the truth. He presented the evidence in such a way that the judge had no choice but to consider Raphael a criminal, helping to protect his own narrative with a false appearance of prestige. At the back of the room, Aunt Clara remained silent, but I knew she was seething. It was a whirlwind of emotions, and I saw a struggle between doubt and defense in a battle playing out in her eyes. I felt the strength of the truth manifesting, and it encouraged me to press on, for now, time was on my side. The execution of our strategy was clear, but the climax of the trial lay not only in the evidence we had, but in how we handled it. I realized that not only were the frauds important, how we addressed the situation also affected the reactions of the people in that room. The fight for my emotions, which I had been losing myself in during years of pain and betrayal, was about to culminate. The day of the verdict arrived, and I was in a state of chronic nervousness. Memories of my father danced in my mind, grounding me with a calmness I didn't know I needed. We entered the room, and the silence was almost deafening. The atmosphere was tense, and the judge himself, in his gravity, looked at us with a countenance that indicated that he didn't underestimate the weight of the case he was handling. After a few hours of deliberation, the judge finally addressed us. After considerable analysis of the evidence presented, this court has found sufficient evidence to determine that Raphael Sequeira did not act in good faith and manipulated the assets in the management of the inheritance to the detriment of Isabella Hayes. Therefore, the action brought by Isabella is upheld, and consequently, the will shall be declared null and void. In that instant, a wave of emotion washed over me. The weight of what I had endured all this time finally seemed to be lifted. The verdict wasn't just a legal victory, it was an affirmation of identity, a reclaiming not only of what was mine, but also of my family's honor. Leaving the courthouse, a new weight became bearable. I had made a choice to rise and strengthen everything my father had left behind: memories, lessons, and above all, a legacy now restored. I faced the challenge, and justice finally prevailed, not just through words, but through a triumph that would resonate through all future generations of our family. The fight wasn't in vain. It made us stronger and more united. And so, with a renewed spirit, I returned home, certain that my inheritance was not only saved, but had become a beacon to illuminate all who would follow in my footsteps. After the verdict, a wave of relief washed over me. The court victory meant more than the recovery of material possessions. It meant the restoration of my family's honor and a balm to my soul. My father's legacy was safe, but the real fight was just beginning. In the days that followed, I realized I needed to channel this new energy into something practical. The pain and struggle I experienced could help others facing similar situations. With that in mind, I organized a meeting with close friends and fellow lawyers. We wanted to create a support platform for those engaged in inheritance battles, similar to the one I had endured. We christened our initiative Legacy of Truth, a tribute to what my father represented and what I hoped would be passed down to future generations. At that meeting, everyone's support and determination were palpable. Each person shared experiences, and the idea began to take shape. We planned events and seminars, offering information on inheritance rights and how to deal with fraud. Creating this support network was a way to inspire others, and more importantly, to show that the truth always prevails. I could see the transformation happening. The stories I shared impacted many people, and I saw the gleam of hope in their eyes. Those who sometimes felt small or powerless became empowered. I drew strength from their strength, and together we resonated a powerful message. No matter how difficult the fight, your voice and your story have immeasurable value. However, Raphael and Aunt Clara hadn't given up entirely. The legal battle was far from over. Information reached me indicating they would try to overturn the court's decision, looking for loopholes or errors in the process. I knew the battle could be long, but now I was more prepared than ever. Instead of giving up, I let this threat only reinforce my determination. One day at a meeting with the Legacy of Truth team, I felt the strength of our project resonate. Each of us was united by the cause, and the energy in the air was electrifyingly positive. At times, the road ahead seemed dark, but mutual support and collective struggle kept us steadfast. In one of these meetings, I looked around the table at the committed faces and felt the empathy and connection of those who believed in the mission. Day by day, things transformed, filled with awareness events and lectures on inheritance and legal protection. Meetings became frequent, and with each new testimony, more people joined us. This new reality, fueled by a collective plan, became a symbol of hope. And so, I continued to build this new chapter of my life, still facing the challenges that lay ahead. The echo of my father's legacy still resonated in my ears, reminding me that every battle had meaning, and that every story told was a step toward the truth. In time, I realized that the fight for justice and truth shaped not only my life, but also the future of many. The wisdom I inherited transformed into courage and struggle, and in a way I never imagined, my father's legacy had become a beacon, illuminating the path for me and so many others, seeking what is just and true. With renewed perspective and a strong community at my side, I came to the conclusion that protecting the legacy wasn't just about reclaiming what had been lost. It was about ensuring that the lessons learned were not forgotten. What was once a world of darkness transformed into a shared space of goodness and justice, and I was more than ready to face any storm that might come next. The fight continued, but now I knew I wasn't alone. Each person shared experiences, and the idea began to take shape. We planned events and seminars, offering information on inheritance rights and how to deal with fraud. Creating this support network was a way to inspire others and, more importantly, to show that the truth always prevails. I could see the transformation happening. The stories I shared impacted many people, and I saw the gleam of hope in their eyes. Those who sometimes felt small or powerless became empowered. I drew strength from their strength, and together we resonated a powerful message. No matter how difficult the fight, your voice and your story have immeasurable value. However, Raphael and Aunt Clara hadn't given up entirely. The legal battle was far from over. Information reached me indicating they would try to overturn the court's decision, looking for loopholes or errors in the process. I knew the battle could be long, but now I was more prepared than ever. Instead of giving up, I let this threat only reinforce my determination. One day at a meeting with the Legacy of Truth team, I felt the strength of our project resonate. Each of us was united by the cause, and the energy in the air was electrifyingly positive. At times, the road ahead seemed dark, but mutual support and collective struggle kept us steadfast. In one of these meetings, I looked around the table at the committed faces and felt the empathy and connection of those who believed in the mission. Day by day, things transformed, filled with awareness events and lectures on inheritance and legal protection. Meetings became frequent, and with each new testimony, more people joined us. This new reality, fueled by a collective plan, became a symbol of hope. And so, I continued to build this new chapter of my life, still facing the challenges that lay ahead. The echo of my father's legacy still resonated in my ears, reminding me that every battle had meaning and that every story told was a step toward the truth. In time, I realized that the fight for justice and truth shaped not only my life, but also the future of many. The wisdom I inherited transformed into courage and struggle, and in a way I never imagined, my father's legacy had become a beacon, illuminating the path for me and so many others seeking what is just and true. With renewed perspective and a strong community at my side, I came to the conclusion that protecting the legacy wasn't just about reclaiming what had been lost. It was about ensuring that the lessons learned were not forgotten. What was once a world of darkness transformed into a shared space of goodness and justice, and I was more than ready to face any storm that might come next. The fight continued, but now I knew I wasn't alone.